This is just a prototype talk about the metaphor of bubbles for community and community development. What this comes down to is there's a thing about bubbles which is interesting. The fact that they have a space which is a space for affinity. That thing which is a sense of the possibility of belonging, the possibility of being in a group, the possibility of going from being an individual to being part of a community, part of a group. And in talking about the affinity, it would be useful to talk about some of the parts of the bubble. I think one of the things which is really important is, given the opportunity, given access to the materials, the finance, all of these other things, anyone can blow bubbles. They're not a hard thing to do. They are something that all people have the possibility of being able to do, in the same way that anyone can or could develop a community. However, there are barriers to doing that. The other side of that is, of course, people love to play with bubbles. They are familiar. They are something which people feel affinity towards. And that sense of the visibility of something you want to be involved with, the possibility of being part of something is important. Sometimes we need to make the thing more explicit. And of course, bubbles are something that we play with together. Some people organise the creation of them, and this goes to the idea of community connectors and also useful outsiders that you see in ABCD theory. The idea that people create and make connections through play, through the creation of bubbles, and these things are what begin to connect us together. They may seem thin, they may seem even possibly ephemeral, and yet they matter. And thus we come to possibly the oddest idea, the idea of discussing the infrastructure of bubbles. Bubbles need people and material to blow them. Bubbles are created by pulling together the materials and having them so that people who wish to create bubbles can. When we want to blow bubbles, we need the soapy water and we need the thing to blow through. And when we create bubbles, of course we create many bubbles, and yet most of them burst very quickly. And that's expected and something which we understand. They are not stable versions of infrastructure. They are created. Most fail, but many carry on. And we find joy in the fact that those bubbles fly and continue to fly until, of course, they burst. And as bubbles move, they change shape. We can't control how the bubble forms itself in a sense of how it maintains its form. They can be large, they can be small, they can be round, they can be many shapes. And as they move, they change. And this is part of the idea that communities also can't be controlled. Which goes to that sense that even though we can blow bubbles, and even though we can support the creation of them, and support the creation of community through money, through infrastructure, all these things, we can't actually control what happens, whether they fail, whether they succeed. We can merely help people. And of course, bubbles are easy to pop. Communities fail. Communities can just stop. Something happens which makes them fail. A person leaves, a person arrives. Something changes, and they change and they fall apart. But of course, if one takes a view that community development is bubble blowing, then many people can blow more bubbles, and that can create more things. And so communities change and shift, and yet what we need to do is support the infrastructure of bubbles.